Welcome back. Councillors back in. Councillor Holbrook. Are the beach people?
Have you done that?
There you go.
Doing it? Trying to get Hamish. Because you're going to reverse the papers, aren't you?
Yeah.
Sorry, just a minute. Everyone vanished on us. We're just tracking them down, sorry.
Sorry, we're just waiting for staff to be located. There's some kind of GPS on them.
We microchip everyone. You're next, councillors.
You'll all be vaccinated. Compliments of Bill Gates. With the leave of the councillors, I'd like to move item 8.3, adoption of the Kapiti Coast District Council Beach Bylaw, to be managed now. And it's on page 46. Hamish and Lisa.
Morena koto. The report that you have on the beach bylaw is presenting our new beach bylaw for adoption. So the bylaw incorporates several adjustments as a result of the feedback that we received through the consultation process that we ran in October and November last year. The majority of the bylaw content of that remains unchanged. Also, I just want to note, because we consulted in the statement of proposal on a whole range of things, including bylaw changes, but also operational, the attachment to the report has a summary of the submissions, which presents for all of you and for public access the results of the consultation process, as well as all of the final analysis and recommendations. So just to note that that's in there, but this paper is just focusing on the bylaw content of that process. Sorry, excuse my puffing, just running down the stairs. So what I'd like to do first is just talk you through the three key adjustments to the bylaw that went out for consultation, the draft. So first of all, one change is that we have removed the rule that was suggesting that people should give way to vehicles within boat launch sites. So there was actually quite a lot of public support for that, but some of the opposition from some of the submitters was really, really compelling, including one of the boat clubs, who really felt that actually having a rule that's different in that space to the rest of the beach would be very confusing for people, and they felt that the onus should remain on the vehicle driver to make sure that those around them are safe. So we have withdrawn that, and the same rule will apply that's currently there across the beach, which is vehicles have to give way to all other beach users. we had originally suggested that because there was an issue about the level of activity within those boat sites. So the appropriate response that we're putting up was actually already included in one of our other proposals, which is to increase the signage around those sites, particularly in the busy boat areas, with the signposting so that people who are walking in from outside will know you're entering a boat launch area, so there'll be vehicle activity in there, and to let the people within that area who driving vehicles that you can't go any further than that because this is a pedestrian area. The second change is the access at the end of the avenue in Otaki. So we consulted on that to see whether people would prefer that was closed and reverted to a pedestrian access way, or whether we should still allow vehicles there. So the majority of the community said no, we'd like to keep it open for vehicle access. So we've added that to the vehicle access ways list in there. And the final substantive change is that we've made quite a few changes to the locations for the longline fishing restrictions. So we had, people were generally happy with the period and the times, but we had quite a few suggestions where we haven't quite got it right in terms of the locations where longlines should be restricted. So we've made some changes, and what we've done is we've focused on a key swimming area that's in high use over the summer period in each of the suburbs up and down the coast. So I think there's 6 or 7 of them there. What else can I tell? So those are the 3 main changes to the bylaw rules as a result of that consultation. Just to also let you know, we have also included a note about there are some areas where under Greater Wellington's proposed natural resource plan that driving is restricted. We haven't included those as prohibited driving areas because they're only restrictions, and there's a lot of leeway in there about where you can drive. You can still drive to launch a boat and things like that. So we've just noted them in our bylaw to be aware that those areas exist, and some types of driving are not permitted under the proposed natural resource plan, but we didn't want to restrict people from the areas where they can currently drive wholesale because of certain conditions in there. So just to let you know that we've noted that in there. You'll notice in the report that the Manly Street site is not included in the list of boat launch sites. We've heard a lot about that this morning. So our advice, as originally proposed, is still to close the site. But we understand that there's been quite a lot of talk around council, and some decisions may vary on that. So just to let you know that we have also provided to Democracy Service just some wording for a recommendation. If you decide you'd like to keep that open as a boat launch site, then all we do is we just add that back in to the list of authorised boat launch sites so that can be done. The other amendments in terms of the changes to the bylaw that we consulted on are really minor and technical. We might have changed some wording, little things like clarifying where motorised and non-motorised watercraft can launch from. Some of those things that just came up through the consultation that we've cleared up.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Rendell.
It relates to misrepresentation. Now, I've just heard the staff member saying they were prepared to reinsert, or maybe if the councillors agreed, reinsert the clause in the bylaw about Manly Street Pavaruru. My understanding is there is nothing in our current bylaw, that says mentions Manly Street.
The staff, the Councillor Rendell is using.
There's nothing in our bylaw.
Yeah, you've been requested to say what standing orders you're quoting.
Oh, sorry, paragraph 27, the first sentence.
No, understanding orders.
Oh, understanding orders, what are you raising?
D. Misrepresentation. D. 25.2D.
So you're claiming there's a misrepresentation.
Well, paragraph 27 says remaining proposed amendment to the bylaw is a proposal to close the boat launch and retrieve site on Manley Street. My submission is there is nothing in the current bylaw that mentions Manley Street. There's nothing in the current bylaw.
So what is it? What's been misrepresented?
That statement, they said they talked about removing the boat launch site, Manley Street and Parapara.
Okay, hang on. Chief Executive.
Now, I think you've misunderstood the comments of staff, councillor. What staff said was our advice remains as it is. We understand councillors may wish to resolve a different solution, in which case they can do that. So there is no misrepresentation there, councillor. That was just a statement of the current state with regard to that issue. Sorry, it's not clarification, and it's now for the mayor to rule, sorry.
You want to withdraw that so we can get on with it and start with the commission.
You have to withdraw?
Or do you want me to rule there?
No, I'll leave it. I will accept. I will follow the chief executive.
Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you. So, yes, just to clarify, it's not currently in the bylaw, but we've made provisions if you want to make an alternative decision to be able to include that easily for you. What we've done is we've proposed that the bylaw is going to come into effect on the 1st of June. So although we may adopt it today with various amendments as you decide, the most substantive thing that's in there at the moment is quite a great improvement to the ability of councillors and police to be able to issue fines to people for driving and parking offences on the beach. With that in mind, we have proposed 1st of June as the enforced date because we'd like to do an education campaign to make sure that people understand the current rules that are there and understand that the bylaw is going to bring in some new fines associated with those rules before that actually comes in force and people are caught out. So that 2-month period allows us to make sure that people really understand the rules and what's going to happen when they change. So we've got a communications and implementation plan set up to run over those 2 months so that we're ready and prepared for the bylaw to come into force on the 1st of June. We've also, in part of that plans, there's some further carry-on activities for later in the year as well to do a reminder before summer when a lot of the beach beach use really ramps up, to do another reminder of what's changed in the beach bylaw since you were here last summer as well. So I think that's about all. Our legal counsel has reviewed the bylaw and we've met all the requirements of the Local Government Act and there's no conflict with BORA. So happy to take your questions on anything that's in there.
I think before the questions asked, can you put that the change up there so we can see what it is?
Oh, yes. Grayson, would you be able to?
I think he wants you to confirm it.
Ask just to clarify. Just this.
Guru, I've got my light on.
So just popping up so that you can see that proposed change to recommendations if that's the decision taken.
Thank you very much for that, and congratulations on what's been a long and involved process. And I think it's a really good example of fulsome and good community engagement. We had a submission today on Marram Way. I think it's called, in Waikanai, and the extension of the longline fishing area. Was this, we haven't had a response to that. Was that considered by staff, and what was the outcome?
So that was one of the areas that we adjusted. We had 400 metres either side of Peka Peka Road, and as a result of some of the submissions on that, the residents down in Marin Way were concerned about that pushing the long lining activity down to where they are. So we extended it down to Marin Way. We've heard this morning from some of the people who've come to speak and address you directly that they still feel that that's not quite enough. There would be an option if you wish to extend that another 400 metres down. Yes, we did make an adjustment to so that we restricted long lining along that whole residential area in Peka Peka.
I'm just waiting for the... Yeah, I've been listening back to a few council meetings, and the pauses are very pregnant as we wait for our microphones to come on. What would it be possible to do that today to increase that area? Would that disrupt the process? Because I'm aware that if we did that today, then we're not giving the people who longline fish there potentially the chance to respond to that. Is there a problem with that in terms of the process, or would you see any kind of problem?
It's my understanding that as long as the issue has been traversed during a consultation process, and it was, we went out directly on areas, and the adjustments that we are making to what we consulted on are based on submitters' feedback. Today was just another extension of that submitters' feedback, so because we have formally consulted on that, it is my understanding that we're well within the remit to make a further adjustment there.
And would it be staff advice to make that adjustment based on the submission that we heard today, which we also have in writing?
I haven't seen that, sorry, but I was listening this morning. It was my understanding that the most that they were talking about was just moving that down another 250 metres from where it was. So we'd be perfectly comfortable with that. I think the concern for them was that just the drift back in lines, that they may drift over that particular area. I wouldn't see a major concern with making that adjustment, and it's very simple. I've sent some text after hearing that this morning that we could easily make that change if we decided to.
It'd be great if we could have that, I think.
Councillor Coates, then Councillor Elliott.
Thanks, Lisa. I've got a few questions through you, Mr. Chair, and I'll just move through them and just pause on each one. On page 85 of the agenda, or 84, 85, it talks about boat launching. I know we had lots of discussion around non-motorised watercraft and kayaks and so forth. I appreciate this is a big document, so I may have got this wrong, but the way that I read it, my concern is that there isn't wording saying that you can launch. So there is wording that says you can launch a non-motorised watercraft on the beach, but it's not clear that you shouldn't then park on the beach. So I wondered whether it needed anything added to it just to make it very clear under the bylaw that although you're allowed to launch, if you haven't got a trailer, you're not allowed to park in the boat launch and retrieve area. And then I've got a few other questions.
Can I just double check, are you asking about within the driving permitted areas, or are you asking about the northern suburbs?
Can you move the mic closer? I'm all in out of here.
In terms of reading through the bylaw, what I read was the provision to make it very clear that people with non-motorised beechcraft could still go onto the beach and launch their craft. But then when I read about the parking and so forth, my worry is, and maybe I've just reading too much into it, but it isn't clear to those people if they're reading the bylaw or being told about it, that you're not actually allowed to then park on the beach. So if you go down with your kayak, you launch, you've got to get back off the beach, and you can't just go and park up.
All right, so I'll just clarify. So in the areas in our southern beaches where you're not allowed to drive or park because they're restricted and you're only allowed in there for boat launch and retrieve, People who are launching non-motorised watercraft, like a kayak, off their boat, can use any of those boat launch sites to go in and launch that. They can park the vehicle that they used for launching that boat. We talked earlier in the month about providing some operational guidance, so we were able to identify who those people were, because of the purpose of the parking space in those boat launches is you have launched and retrieved a boat. It doesn't have to be motorised. It doesn't have to require a trailer. And particularly in terms of things like if you had a kayak, leaving it on the beach and then going to park your car somewhere else would not potentially be feasible if there was only you.
Yeah.
So if you have a watercraft or a boat, you are allowed to park in that area.
Thank you.
That's absolutely no problem at all.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies that. The road at the end of Sims Road that goes down to the southern side of the Otaki River mouth, can we just clarify that if the bylaw is adopted today as it stands, that Otaki and Tohoro people can still access that road, we're just remaining silent on it? So,
Yes, that's totally correct.
thank you. It's at the end of Sims Road. There was further discussion around the compromise at the end of Te Horo Beach Road. There was a suggestion around putting bollards up and so forth. Again, understanding that this paper today is about the bylaw, so this is more operational matters. When do we talk about the other alternatives? We talked about improved signage, potentially improving that access way a little bit. That's that compromise where I'm going to have to go back as an elected member and say, yeah, we heard you, but we also heard from a lot of other people to keep it open. However, we are looking to improve the signage and so forth, because I don't want to clog today up with lots of additional recommendations, but I also don't want to miss out in terms of getting that sort of commitment from council to work on those other mitigation solutions.
Sure. So thank you for your question. We have in the recommendations just a notation about the plans in place for communications and implementation work. That plan includes the implementation of all the operational responses as well. So in terms of the car park at the end of Te Horo Beach Road, yes, we had put a proposal out that we should be blocking that to restrict vehicle access. The community feedback indicated that that wouldn't be wise and that would create more conflict in the area, so we're not progressing that. We will be improving signage. And the signage improvements and things like that will be part of their implementation plan. So there's a bylaw aspect of everything that has to be in place for the 1st of June, and then it's the follow-up of all the operational things as well. So that's something that we can also come and talk to you about, so that when we engage with the community or we want to design some signage, that we can talk to the local elected members.
Thank you. And my last one was around some possible added recommendations, although I think that this may not be the meeting for it, so I really want to get a bit of guidance from staff. One was around the continued work with the police on the summer beach patrols is supported and continued, because obviously from a Otaki Tohoro perspective, our community is the one that's, I would say, statistically higher affected by those motorcycles and motorbikes and vehicles on the beaches. So I had sent that through to staff just as a potential added recommendation, D or E. But again, today may not be the day, given that we're passing the bylaw. That could be more of an operational one. And the second one was around just staff support around that idea that I floated around a designated area for motorbikes, and that would be considered through a future annual plan, just noting, one, that there'd be no idea in terms of potential support, cost, and when I refer to staff time, I'm not signalling significant time, but that just I'm not on my own on it in terms of that discussion, noting that at our recent meeting with the police, they raised it and supported it, that you're at too, Your Worship. So I don't know whether it's worthwhile adding these as recommendations at the end of this, but if not, then when? Or it could just be noting it like we did with the...
So, you know, you're right on both sides. It is a separate issue. In the simplest of worlds, we would just park that for bringing back. However, the amount of heat that goes around this issue overall says to me that I'm certainly not averse to you putting in a couple of noting recommendations to those effects if you felt that was... I don't want to open Pandora's box here and have everybody do this, but in this instance, I can see why there might be some merit in either minuting it or having noting recommendations added.
Councillor Elliott and then Councillor Hanford.
All right, thank you for your work on this. Hamish, I'm wondering if you got my email yesterday and noted it, and so maybe you have some prior warning, but as we hadn't seen a copy of the written draft, we hadn't seen parts of it like the interpretations. So I'm asking that we consider adding interpretation. One would be to have the word in the alphabetical list, customary rights, and then to have an abbreviated WE description of customary right, a statement outlining customary rights and what that means, maybe with a reference to the Marine Reserves Act or whatever act it is that it is written in. And I tell you why I'd like it there, because I'd like it there at the fingertips of those who are trying to do compliance and regulatory work down the track, over the next 10 years. And the other word that I would like included in that interpretation list is rahui. So that should rahui need to be imposed at any time in the next 10 years for conservation purposes or any other purposes, that it is clearly explained already in the bylaw, and we don't have to look at amending the bylaw in any way. And that the public understand rahui, because it is an amazing tool to use. And I just wanted to check too, thirdly, that signage, that there is nothing in the bylaw wording as it is that prohibits in any way the adding of te reo and signage, or other languages as they're needed, but probably more over te reo.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll respond to each of those as we go through. The customary rights. So we have specified at the front of the bylaw that the bylaw doesn't override and must always ensure that we enables people to comply with all of their protected customary rights under the Marine and Coastal Act. So that's already in there. We can certainly, if you wish, add that into the list of definitions and define customary rights. It's a very complicated area, so I wouldn't want to paraphrase the information that's in the Marine and Coastal Act, but we could certainly add it there and say as defined in the Marine and Coastal Act. But it is currently covered in there on the first page.
So I've got the first page here, and I think the whole thing in my appendices, and I'm not finding that statement.
Okay, it's on page of the actual bylaw, it's on page 3. In the objective, there's a section that says that nothing in the bylaw derogates from any provision of or the necessity for compliance with a lot of related legislation. Customary rights is one of those. So what it's saying is those pieces of legislation are a higher level legislation and their compliance and needs come first, and anything else that's here.
Just hang on a moment. Natasha, do you want to say something?
Thank you. Thanks for raising this point, Councillor Elliott. One of the things we'd have to be quite mindful of if we were to be dropping the exact definition into there or paraphrasing it is a primary piece of legislation can change over time, and therefore it's actually much more appropriate in our legal document to be referring to the primary legislation rather than trying to encapsulate that as it stands into our bylaw.
Would that apply to the definition that Councillor Elliott asked about rahuis?
Rahuis.
So I guess in terms of rahui, the point I'd make would be slightly different in terms of that's a cultural practice, and I think we'd need to be very careful about whether or not we would have any legitimate powers under the Local Government Act to be setting a framework for the legal application of a rahui through a bylaw.
In terms of the Rahui, so we can talk to our iwi partnerships a little bit more about that. I know that it has been brought up 2 or 3 times before over the last years. Having Rahui included as maybe one of the defined areas or something that we have in the beach bylaw may not be the most appropriate venue or mechanism for that. Those defined areas, council has to go and consult on them first and then make a council resolution. So the mechanisms inherent to that are quite different from, I think, the intent and the cultural aspects of Rahui. But we could certainly talk to our iwi partnership teams about that.
I just want to say that I suspect that my request has been lost in translation, because I'm not suggesting anyway that council impose rahuis or give ourselves the right to under those defined areas. What I'm saying is that when and if iwi ever impose a rahui in the last 10 years, in the next 10 years, that at least people, the general public, can go somewhere and read as part of the beach bylaw, which they're probably going to go to because it's probably going to be on the beach, and understand what the word rahui means and what it's there for.
Chief Executive.
Councillor, I think as you've heard, I appreciate that what you were simply asking for is a definition in the bylaw so that people can see it, but it would be completely, in our view, inappropriate. It would create the wrong understanding of why it was there. You've heard from officers already that it could not be imposed as a bylaw action. So therefore, to have it there and suggest that in future, if excuse me, if a rahui were imposed under the bylaw, we could somehow reinforce that. We couldn't, and therefore there is no point to have the definition in the bylaw.
The last one was signage, but also we will talk to our iwi partnerships team as well about whether we can use some of our website links to be able to provide some more information on those things. We're trying to move away from having people have to read a legal document and trying to make the information easily accessible on the web for when people first access it. So that might be a good way to link into customary rights information for people in the rahui and connections with local iwi. So we'll take that on board. Thank you.
I think that's a good point that Councillor Elliott is raising, is the public education about EVs. That's really good. So I think if you can manage that, that'll be useful.
Thank you. And no, there's absolutely nothing in the bylaw that would prevent us having bilingual or multilingual signage of any kind.
Councillor Hanford.
Oh, kia ora. I just have a question around the North Manly Street beach access. So if it's access with swipe card, can we be assured that disability access will be preserved and potentially enhanced to make sure that those concerns of the community members who spoke today about disability access, you know, pedestrian access is one thing, but disability access and making sure there's space for that is another. So I just wanted to raise that and hope that would, if you could respond to disability access as a whole in terms of any site or access that might be gated.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So the models of what the gates might look like haven't been developed yet. That is still conceptual. There's a lot of options out there for swipe cards. We're looking at probably something a little bit more user-friendly, like cell phone access, something like that, where people don't have to get out of their vehicles. In terms of disability access, absolutely. Where disability parking is provided for people for mobility parks, that would be one of our key audiences, making sure people can get in and out with their boats and making sure people with mobility parking can get there. The Manly Street access is not a disability parking site for people with mobility permits. The actual structure of the site, you sometimes almost need a four-wheel drive to get up and over that hill. So it's not something that is regularly used. It is used at the moment for a lot of reasons other than boat launching, but there's better access for the smaller cars like Driving Miss Daisy and that kind of things at some of the other sites that have the concrete ramps, such as Waikanai Boating Club and Paraparam Boating Club, where it's easier and there's wider stretches of beach to go along. But yes, that would be a key concern for us, is making sure that anybody, not just disabled, but anybody who has a right to be on the beach is still able to access it.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, in terms of the bylaw, when we've obviously checked to see if it's consistent with the Local Government Act. Do we check to see if it's consistent with the Marine and Coastal Act as well, or do we just sort of accept that because that's Parliament that comes over the top of it regardless?
In terms of customary rights, that comes over on top of it because we've specifically provided it there, and it sits in a higher level of legislative priority when you're looking at things. In terms of general consistency with other legislation, yes, there has been a review to make sure that the bylaw is consistent with other legislation.
I guess my next question is on sort of a related note. How does Greater Wellington manage customary right access on the strip of the beach that they manage?
That's a good question. I'm not able to comment on how they might manage
No,
that.
because I was having a quick search on the website. I couldn't find a simple answer for it either. They talk about customary rights, but yeah, I was just trying to understand, because obviously whatever approach we took to it would have to be consistent with whatever approach they take, and likewise for DOC as well, because obviously we all interlink around that sort of thing. And in terms of what Councillor Elliott was bringing up around Rahui, is that something we could look to address through the general bylaw, given that they can apply across the district and not necessarily in the beach area?
I think
You're shaking our head in that direction.
Oh, actually, we were going to take them, but
I think what the staff indicated before is that a bylaw probably isn't the right mechanism to be doing that, and we'll be looking at something that's alternative to a bylaw in terms of either a policy or some. If the purpose is about educating the public about what a rahui is and what actions they may or may not need to take, that might not be a bylaw requirement. It could be a policy. It could be some kind of a communications tool.
Because up in Auckland, they've obviously had the rahui on the Waitakere Ranges because of kauri dieback. So is that a completely sort of voluntary thing, or is there actually some sort of bylaw behind that? Or is that specific to the Auckland Super City setup?
Not familiar with that situation to know, but it's something we could look into in terms of the local government have dealt with the issue.
Cool.
Natasha, just on that matter that Councillor Compton raised in terms of customary rights, the regional council has got a natural resources plan. That's a legal document. Wouldn't that cover that?
Without having a specific look at that, I think in the same way they would be deferring to the primary legislation as being able to override anything that is set in their natural resources plan as well. But again, I'm saying that at a principled level rather than necessarily having had a detailed look at their plan in relation to that.
I know EV had a very strong submission into that and shaping that, so I suspect that it will be covered there. So worth having a look.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to have a quick dig through before, but
you have another question?
Yeah, so I guess it relates to the barriers question. That's something we address coming down the track because it's an operational response, and that's potentially we could also look at how the customary rights access fits into that question as well. Would I be right in assuming that?
Absolutely, in terms of authorised users, yes.
Cool, perfect, thank you.
Councillor Holliday.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, just have a few things. On number 26, page 49, I note that we're including designated areas. So in this one here, include designated disability parking spaces in the list of defined areas. I just wanted to, I've touched on this previously, but just wanted to ask, with regards to creating more areas for disability parking in the future, and also taking into consideration we've got a very elderly population, so there could be potential for exploring access for our elderly and infirm who perhaps don't have disability stickers. Would that be potentially covered as an operational issue further on down the track?
The use of a defined area would be a legal use rather than an operational. That would be a statutory change. So having that listed in there enables us to go out and consult with the public about extra areas where we would like to formally designate as designated disability parking. in that we could change, that we could use a definition of disability that includes elderly people who don't have mobility parking. All of that would be up for public consultation. A shorter process than this, which is why we've included that and iwi traditional practices as things that we could define areas for in the future.
Cool. Okay, that's cool. I'm just curious if I'm involved in going down to the beach, launching a boat. I've got some people with me that I've got a pile of equipment with them to go into the boat. Are they going to be able to drive down to the beach to put that equipment onto the boat as such? I guess that's a no-win question, really, isn't it? Sorry.
Yes, there would
Councillor,
be.
I always load the boat up before I leave home, personally, and I think that would be the only smart thing to do.
Yeah, you can get some people. I appreciate they would be then required to park out on the street after they've dropped off as such. Sort of leads me on to another question just in regards to something you said before as well. If people are launching non-motorised kayaks, example, and park on the beach, yet it's not obvious that they perhaps have had a launching process, if you like. Is there any way to identify that at all, or?
Yes, so that's something we covered in our briefing recently, and we're going to provide operational guidance to the public spaces staff about how you might best identify.
Okay.
Yep.
Now we just see how that goes.
Councillor James, can I get Natalia first before? Natalia.
Kia ora, I'm just looking at number 26. Can you please explain? I'm not sure what iwi practices are. It's got no amendments are recommended for the remaining bylaw proposals that were consulted on, which were to, and then it's got at the end, include iwi practices in the list of defined areas.
Yes, it is deliberately vague in its wording. When we did our consultation, there was quite an interest in being able to have particular areas set aside for iwi traditional practices, but within the consultation time frame, there wasn't enough time for iwi to be able to tell us what they might be and what they might look like. So using that provision of defined areas enables us to work through that process and still allocate them later. Yeah. Yep.
Councillor Coates.
I just want to follow up on the question that Councillor Hanford asked around the disability, or I want to be careful using the word disability access because that leads you to think of the permit system, but people that are less able. And I might have misunderstood your response in terms of the Manly Street access. So the concerns that we had even today through public speaking was that people may live in the area and want to access that beach that are less able, and will they still be able to access that area through there if it is an electronic gate? Will the access be in consideration for those that are less able?
So no, we're not changing. So if Manly Street goes back on as a boat launch site, then the rules that are in place now will continue for that site. It's a boat launch and retrieve site. It's not a designated site for mobility parking.
I think as it'll be considered as part of the operational considerations of the type and nature of solution for the site and accessibility on a case-by-case basis. So we'll consider it at the time. Cool. And I think we've previously mentioned to Council we'll come back and have a discussion once we have further information as part of that process comes forward.
Thanks, Hamish. And I guess because if we make the decision today, we don't want to find out later, or because of that decision, we can no longer do that, hence asking the question. So I'll save a little bit of comment for debate because the next one's not a question. Last question I had was around the access at the avenue, and if I, without looking at my paper again, recall that that's obviously the support to the feedback we had was to leave that remain open. Knowing that site there and the less developed nature of that access, I'm assuming that by the recommendations today that landscape is going to remain the same. We're not going to form it any further to make improved access. It is just going to remain as it is, and if people want to drive onto the beach there, they can.
So that's an operational aspect. I'm not sure if there are any planned improvements to that site. Yes, we are retaining vehicle access. I am not involved in what that may look like physically at that site from now on, but there will be a sign there confirming that vehicles are able to use that access way.
Councillor Provanov.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have 3 different areas I'd like to ask questions about. So first of all, long lining. I certainly hear what Mr. White is saying in relation to moving the exclusion area south of Marram Way. I'm just looking at a bigger picture here in relation to Waikanae itself. So on the map here, there is an area around Waikanae boat launching area, which is 250 either side of it, of the boat launching. And I suppose the reasoning that Mr. White has given as to reducing it further south is because of the access and the residential properties there. When you actually look at North Waikanae Beach, it's actually more built up there than what it is in Marram Way. So I'm just wondering whether or not the area at Waikanae Beach should be extended much further north.
The area at Waikanae for longline fishing goes all the way up from Waikanae Boat Club right up to Oliver Grove, which covers most of the residential area there.
So I'm looking on the map on the website on page 18. It says summertime restrictions, and it looks as if it doesn't go up to Oliver Grove.
I'm sorry, it does on mine. What? Sorry, councillor. Which? Can I just confirm what you're looking at?
Oh, that will be the draft.
That's the old draft, and it's on our current agenda.
That's the one that we consulted on. We've
Okay.
adjusted.
Okay. So saying that, what is the distance that is people can actually longline between Oliver Grove and 250 metres south of Marram Way? It's not very far. I'm just wondering whether the whole area should be. It must be only maybe 200 metres. It must be a very short distance.
Appears to be more than that on my map. So it's about finding a balance between restricting activities of one kind and still allowing others. The longline restrictions are to preserve the areas to make sure swimming is safe for people within those.
Yeah.
We don't want to overly restrict longline use.
So I suppose the reason I'm asking that is that it's going to confuse people if there's actually only a really small stretch of beach where people can longline. And is it just easier to have the whole area where you cannot longline? Is what I'm asking, just in terms of practicalities.
I don't believe so. No, I believe providing some area within that region for people to be able to do that activity is a good balance, and protecting the key swimming area. So what we heard in the consultation was focusing on the key busy swimming areas,
Okay.
and only restricting those, so to not overly restrict the activity.
Okay. So then, so people who go longlining normally take a vehicle to the beach. The only access to the beach along that section is at Peka Peka and at the Waikanae boat launch area. So in the middle there, people are going to have to drive to that area to go longlining, and people walk there to go swimming.
Yes, you can drive down from Peka Peka. That's a drive-in permitted area down to Oliver Grove. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to highlight that. The second area I wanted to have ask some questions about, I just need to get the right page here. So obviously we've heard quite a lot today about access to the Waikanae River for whitebaiting, etc., etc. So I assume that you are aware that you can actually whitebait at the mouth of the Waikanae River?
Yes, we are aware.
Okay, so this is all about access to that area.
Sorry, what is about access to that area?
So I suppose the people that we've heard today, it's about actually being able to drive down there rather than actually, it's not having to walk a distance.
Yes, and there's a car park right beside the Waikato Estuary in Tūtiri.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so that's good. And so then the other one too is in relation to customary rights. There's been a few questions about that, but how, given the restrictions that are being proposed, how do they work in relation to access for people for customary harvesting occur?
So if somebody has protected customary rights of any kind under the Marine and Coastal Act, that overrides anything that's in our bylaw if they have those rights.
Okay.
Yeah.
So does that include driving physically to the Waikanae River Estuary?
If that was part of the rights agreement under MACA, then yes, it would. I'm not sure how those work, but if somebody provides us with the evidence that they have those rights, then absolutely the rights provided, protected customary rights under MACA, nothing in here is restricting those.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Councillor Holliday, then, Natasha, do you have a response?
I did just want to clarify that under the Marine and Coastal Area Act, there is it does set out a process and some constraints over eligibility for those marine customary title, marine customary rights. So what is in this bylaw is a little bit more specific than what was in the previous bylaw, which was quite generic and would be very difficult to enforce. So that's why the extra words have been added into the proposed bylaw.
Councillor Holliday.
Through you, Mr Mayor, just continuing on some questions. I was wanting some clarity. Golf carts and mobility scooters, how do they fit into the beach?
They fit in permanently.
One moment, please.
Oh, sorry.
So the mobility, I'll just get my statement of proposal. The mobility scooters are, so the where we have vehicle restrictions on our beach, the definition that we use of vehicles links back to the New Zealand Transport Authority definition, which excludes the mobility vehicles. So if you've got one of those little vehicles and you hoot along the beach, that's totally okay. You're not a vehicle, so you would be able to go and drive on the beach at Waikanae if that's how you would access it in your mobility vehicle.
I think it just might be a little bit of an elegant way for some of our elderly to get down to the beach. I was just wanting some clarity around that.
Oh, certainly permitted, yes.
On page 58, 7.2, it has the geographic boundaries of the sites listed may be identified by signage and signposts. Is that referring to the space allowed for the parking as such? Is that not going to be a permanent signage that's sort of maybe going to be signed? Is that what that was referring to?
So yes, so they may be, depending on growth. At the moment, we're going to be signing the Kapiti Boating Club space with signposts at each side, the Waikanae Boating Club space with signage at each side, and if the decision is taken to keep Manly Street open, just the signage at each side as well. The may enables us to be able to signpost other areas should we get busier in the future. The majority of the other areas are either the access is restricted, like in Raumati, there's not actually much room to go on the beach, or they're in areas where you're permitted to drive up and down, so we don't want to overly restrict people's access in those areas.
On page 59, 9.2, talks to any person found discarding or dumping, or directly discarding or dumping of litter, will now be able to, as liable for prosecution. Is that being sort of picked up in the new fine regime that we've got as another part of this paper as well. Are we referring to the $150 fine there, or is that fining going to be in line with the fines for illegal dumping?
Are you talking about the other item that's on today about that? Right, yes. So those fines can be extended through to the beach bylaw. And we have a wee notation that if council agree today to that fine scale, then what we may do is actually reflect that in the offences at the back of this as a technical adjustment so that people are fully aware as well that those apply in this region.
That's great, thank you. 15.1 on page 61, I think it is. Access points to for authorised vehicles. I just note that Paraparaumu Boating Club or the Waikanai Boating Club aren't on there, and I'm assuming there's an access point off-street through those. Do they need to be included?
No, those are driving prohibited areas. You're only allowed to enter the beach for boat launch or if you have a mobility parking. So they're not vehicle access ways.
Right, gotcha. Okay, thank you very much. Um, 15.4 refers to the beach access point on Oliver Grove, North Waikanai. Now that doesn't have drive-on access there, is that right? Is that correct? So when we've got access down on the beach, will there be a sign there or something just to show people that they can't drive past this point?
We can consider that as an operational matter. I don't know if there is one there at the moment, sorry.
Cool. So there's no way they can access off the beach down that end, is that right? In a vehicle?
Sorry, which area were you talking about?
Down by, it's on Waikanai, north of Waikanai Beach there.
No, that's for access down from Peka Peka.
Yeah, but it sort of stops there. You can't take the car any further.
That's right. From Oliver Grove down, the whole coastline is driving prohibited. That's correct.
Sorry, this is a little pedantic one. 16.1. Parking on the beach is prohibited in all areas except for the in following areas. If you could just drop the in on that. Sorry.
Thank you.
And the other question I had was around the long lining. We've talked about protecting key swimming areas, and it's an oversight on my behalf as well, but we haven't really talked about protection of the marine reserve as such, with regards to long line fishing. Perhaps, we've talked about it goes out a kilometre, but pretty much, you can drop a long line in literally right next door to the marine reserve, which means, 10 feet out, you're in it, which is illegal to fish in. I gather we're not going to be able to address that in this as such, or should we be addressing that in this?
There is a small space between Kapiti and Kapiti Boating Club and the Waikanai estuary, which sort of marks the marine coastal area where you're not allowed to fish. Yeah. So if anybody was to long line in there, they would have to make sure that they weren't going out for the maximum distances that they can. So some people go 500 metres, some people go 1,000, some people go 1,500. So that would be up to the fishermen to understand. As far as I understand, the fishing community understands very well the marine reserve fishing rules.
Some people have been recently prosecuted would more than likely disagree, but no, that's fine. That's me. Thank you very much.
You done? Councillor Coates has signalled that he wants to move this. We got the amended resolution up.
I didn't see any further names up on the screen, so I thought I'd just see whether council's ready to move along and move recommendations as amended with the Manly Street option.
Yeah, but before that, I just want to ask staff. Some of the other issues that's been raised, like Councillor Holbrook raised the issue of the long line on which the amendments can be managed under 43B. Am I getting that assurance? And Councillor Coates, you're thinking of a further resolution, the advisory notes which you had a discussion with the Chief Executive?
Yeah, notes which I think actually, I might just talk it in terms of the right of introduction, so keeping within.
The question of the Chair is, did you want them in as additional resolutions? Noting,
I thought not as resolutions, but just as noting. Was the signal I got from you.
Yeah.
Or do we just do it as D&E?
Would be happiest if we make sure that they're minuted and noted that way. Would be happiest.
Yeah.
If you wanted them in as a noting resolution, we will.
Whatever's easy, as long as the intent is there. So if you just want to minute it, then
Yep.
I'm fine with that.
Do that.
Yeah.
James,
So
have I got a seconder? Jackie Elliott seconds it. James.
Right of introduction. So look, a lot of work put in this over the last 12 months. I don't think it's quite that long, but from Lisa and the teams, I do want to acknowledge the efforts of the team. I personally saw some quite confrontational discussions that the team had to wear, and I want to acknowledge that and the effort that was put in, particularly by Lisa, but obviously the other stuff and the background behind that. I appreciated being taken over site visits as well from Jackie and her team as well. And I think one thing that we need to consider as elected members when we are putting bylaws in place is the people that actually have to enforce it. And I could say I personally witnessed one of the team while we were doing our walkover as elected members, then having to try to explain to people that were on the beach that shouldn't have been here why, and then ended up entering into almost debate with these people over what you can and can't do. So, I think we've got a responsibility as elected members to have bylaws in place that are practical and that are manageable by our enforcement team. We've also got a clear message from the police that we need to do our bit, and if we do our bit, they'll do their bit. And so, I think where we've landed with this goes towards that intent. We've also heard from the community around the importance of the access at Manly Street, and also Councillor Randall and Halliday and Compton and so forth have indicated support around that as well. So I think there's support around the table for us to continue with that, and I would say that that's probably from a governance versus operational perspective that was referred to members of the public today around the left hand and the right hand, as us trying to find a compromise, considering the challenges that the staff have in terms of enforcing our bylaws, but also elected members balancing out the views of the public around access and trying to keep our people safe. From my perspective as Ultiki Ward Councillor, we still have an issue around motorbikes, dirt bikes and so forth on the beach that this will go some way to addressing, but probably not far enough, and hence why I wanted to include those notes there around sort of doing some further work. And interestingly, noting in our meeting with His Worship the Mayor and myself and two community board members with the police around reviewing the summer beach program, one of the things that they raised, and I hadn't raised it with them, was had we considered somewhere else for people with motorbikes to be able to use. So that is something that I do wish to explore further, and I imagine if we do find a potential venue that would come back to this table through maybe an annual plan for consideration. So with that, I ask that councillors support the bylaw today, and again just ask that the paper notes the work that the team have put into getting us here.
Open for debate. Councillor Compton.
Yeah, I'd like to echo the comments made by Councillor Coots, especially just picking up on that final point he made about the work that staff have done over quite a long period of time, what I view as quite a significant period of pre-engagement on this as well. And I went to a few of those sessions, and there was good community turnout on them, and there's some pretty robust discussions, and those have carried through right to today. And I think one of the important things that was brought up to me recently was someone pointed out that, in the last 25 years, we've had about 20,000 more people move to Kapiti, and that's changing the way that there's a lot more pressure on our beaches, a lot more people wanting to go down there, and as a result, we can't keep doing things the way that we've always done them, or allowing things that weren't necessarily meant to be happening to keep happening. And I think what we're arriving at here is a compromise solution, and I appreciate that not everyone's going to be happy with it, but I think we're arriving at a point where we're trying our best to maintain as much of the access that people have had, the legitimate access to those areas, so that they can go out and still launch boats, and people with the right permits can still get access and all those things, but also acknowledging that actually it is a intensely busy area at times, especially we know around those boat launching areas. Parapara Umu Beach at the Boat Club can get extraordinarily busy, and so we do have to manage that, and that's been the case around the rest of the country. And in the coming 10 years, I think we're going to see that pressure just continue to build in our communities as well, especially as Transmission Gully opens. More people are going to move here, more people are going to want to come visiting here and bringing their boats here and those sorts of things. So we have to come up with a framework that's adaptable over the next decade to do the best that it can to meet those challenges. So, you know, as I said, I don't think everyone's going to be happy with this. I know some people will be angry, but I can stand here today and say that, look, I think we've reached the best possible solution that we can in the circumstances to balance up all those competing interests. And so, yeah, I join Councillor Cootes in urging fellow councillors to support what's before us today.
Councillor McGann.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to echo and tautoko Councillor Cootes and Compton. And the key word there is the compromise, because it's hard to balance all the competing interests. My only comment relates to the process, and that I think that when councillors are expressing some opinions that may go against the staff direction, that in future it might be included as multiple options, signalling to the community that there was a divergence of views, because we certainly heard today from members of the community who thought they weren't being listened to, and by reading the paper, that was the impression they got. And I hope that the members of the community know that they were being listened to, but they just weren't able to see what was going on behind the scenes. And I think we can deal to that by ensuring that there can be more than one option when there are controversial decisions or decisions where it's split. But I also want to thank the incredible work of the staff who have also taken us along on this journey. It has been a real effort to find compromise in what is a really, really nuanced and difficult area where there are competing uses and they don't necessarily converge in the same place. So thank you so much for all your hard work, and I also recommend to councillors following Councillor Cootes and Compton that they agree with this. Councillor Holliday.
Through you, Mr Mayor, and I won't rehash Mr McCann's and the previous councillor's comments, other than to say thank you very much, staff. Your efforts have been appreciated. Look, it is a trade-off, we know that. There's be some people that are happy, that aren't happy, and these are the realities of a growing area. I'd like to see that consideration given to the elderly, and I'd actually like to see some consideration given to the Mangoni protected area as well, but I do appreciate that this will be operational and it will more likely be a longer-term response rather than a shorter-term one. I would like to acknowledge the Mayor with regards to his comments to the Māori contingent that were here today, that will be followed up on. I appreciate that, thank you. And I just wanted to thank the table as well as Ward Councillor for the supporting of the keeping of the Manly Street open. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's it, thank you.
Councillor Randall.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to endorse what Councillor Compton has said, and I agree with him. And I would like staff to note, from an operational point of view, that concern was raised that if you're going to install gates at some of these boat launching sites, people are also using it for their parents and elderly people. And how will they be able to access that? And that, I would like staff to bear that in mind in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Rabanov.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So, first of all, thank you to the staff for the time and effort they've put into to get into today. I know the process was started really early, which was really important to do that, because I know that there's a lot of, I suppose, things to think about and consider, and the viewpoints of so many people. So, in relation to the long lining, I certainly I agree with extending the long lining 250 metres south of Marron Way. But saying that, in relation to Te Horo and the sand dunes there, and I suppose I'm disappointed that there's not a bit more being done in terms of stopping access of quad bikes and motorbikes onto the sand dunes in that area, which is part of KCDC jurisdiction. Thank you.
Councillor Elliott.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you all, and thank you, staff, for your work on this process. I am in support of this recommendation and certainly the amendments that have made it work for a lot of the community. I am someone also who submitted on the last bylaw, and at that point I was and still am very, very interested in the retention of our diverse environments and very special, unique environments out at the beach. So while I'm supporting this, it does seem to give overall umbrella ability for everyone to use our beach environments the way they want to. Personally, I think that there are more thriving biodiversity and flora and fauna in the vehicle turnaround areas of our greenway stumps than there is in the front and back dunes of many of our beaches. And that is something that I will always notice personally when I'm at the beach. They're empty, they're quiet, there's a lot of life missing. And I hope that next time round with the next bylaw we may be able to address this issue a bit more. Thank you.
Councillor Holborough.
So there have already been 3 speakers in support of this motion, so I won't reiterate any of the comments already made. I'm just quite relieved that the entire debate today has been a little shorter than our conversation about horse poo.
Can I top that? I think I can. Before I put the resolution, thank God that we didn't have the nudist people come and claim the space in the beach, which 10 years ago, you know, the last time we had the beach bylaws, there was the front page Dominion story in our paper, and I was the reporter who enjoyed writing that story. So thank God we're not going down that track. I wouldn't want to be exposed, is it? How do you know? On that note, resolution number 43 as amended, moved by Councillor James Coates and seconded by Councillor Elliott. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you very much, and thank you for the people in the public gallery who stayed behind. Thank you.
Given that I didn't have a right of reply, which is fine, but what I did want to just check on was around the communications, because this is great that we've just passed this, but the comms out of here, council closes beaches, so forth. You know, we I don't need to know now, but I think elected members would like to know that there's a communications plan or you know, comms going out around what the decision is, around the ongoing decisions around operationally, further discussion and consultation around so forth. So if I could just leave that there, just given that it's getting late.
My apologies, Mover.
That's fine. I wanted to say it's just as long as the Chief Executive and staff have heard that. So.